pounding that snake's nose, she's still holding the ruby in her other hand. Maker's panties, I was so proud.
Oh,
Ah, shit. They're still holding it. Sorry.
What are you doing?
Pulling a barb.
Oh, okay.
a barv?
Tradition in the Lords of Fortune, from one of our old members, Barv. Good guy, but like most of us, his plans went sideways a lot. Bad blood among your crew's not good for morale, but there's not always time for big, drawn-out apologies. So, when one of us screws up and we know we've screwed up, we do a quick 10 to put it right. Pulling a Barv. Oh, there we go.
Welcome to another deep dive. We've got a ton of articles from you guys about Dragon Age, the Veilguard. It looks like the release has really stirred things up, especially among, longtime fans of the series.
Yeah, putting it lightly, maybe. It's everything from excitement about the new setting to some pretty strong opinions, lots to talk about, character design, gameplay changes, and even some pretty serious accusations like review manipulation.
Okay, let's jump in. The fan reaction to character design. That's one of the first things that jumped out from these articles. Players saying things like generic and even comparing the game to Fortnite.
Visually, it is different. Yeah, definitely a departure from what we've seen. In previous Dragon Age games, some of these articles point specifically to the Qunari. The redesign. Fans are pointing that out as a point of contention.
Right, the Qunari with the horns and the physique.
Exactly, that imposing physique and the horns. They've got this
Mamara.
more streamlined look in the Veilguard, and some fans are interpreting that as the developers trying to, appeal to a wider audience, maybe by toning down some of the series' more distinct features, like the Qunari.
Interesting. And speaking of appealing to a wider audience, we can't ignore this whole debate surrounding the developer statements about Dragon Age being inherently queer. Several articles quoting both the game director, Corinne Bush, and the creative director, John Epler, making statements about the companion's pansexuality and the overall queerness of the Dragon Age universe.
This seems to be where some players are really pushing back. Yeah, and articles are picking up on that. Some are saying this emphasis on queerness feels forced or just like it's out of place in a fantasy setting, while others are arguing that it's, a natural progression for a series that has always been about identity and relationships.
Right, and this sort of ties into a bigger question about the narrative direction of the game, how player choices actually factor into the story. Dragon Age games, they're known for branching storylines and big choices with big impact. But some of these articles are suggesting that the Veilguard might be more linear, maybe limiting player agency.
Yeah, I saw that one article. It's from a pretty well-known gaming blog. They're citing anonymous playtesters, and these playtesters are saying that the main storyline is pretty fixed, and player choices don't have much impact on the overall narrative. A lot of people are concerned that this could mean the Veilguard might be sacrificing the, choice-driven gameplay that made the series so popular to go for a more streamlined experience, maybe a more cinematic one.
Okay, so lots to unpack there. But before we get too deep into that, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about the gameplay itself. There are articles out there comparing the gameplay to God of War and Guardians of the Galaxy. They're suggesting that the Veilguard has moved away from that tactical combat, the tactical combat of the previous games, and towards something more action-oriented.
Right, this gameplay shift, a lot of people are talking about this. Fans who really liked the strategic depth of the combat in the older games, the ones with the complex combat systems, they're expressing disappointment. They feel like it dumbs down the gameplay, makes it less engaging.
Yeah, in a lot of articles, they give specific examples. Like they talk about the removal of the tactical camera.
Right.
And how the skill trees have been simplified. And for some fans, this just feels like, it feels less like classic Dragon Age and more like, your typical action game.
But then you have the articles that take the other side. They argue that this shift in gameplay is, it's necessary. That the series has to evolve to stay relevant in today's gaming landscape. A world dominated by these action-heavy titles.
It's interesting to see how split people are on this. And this kind of leads us to another area of controversy. These allegations of, review score manipulation.
Yeah.
Some of the articles you sent over are claiming that certain YouTubers and other content creators, they were denied review copies of the game.
Yeah.
Because they were critical of the game in the early playtests.
That's a big deal. If true, of course. And these articles, they're suggesting that Bioware might be trying to control the conversation about the game. by only giving review copies to, people who are probably going to have positive reviews, and it brings up questions about transparency, about ethics in game journalism. Some people are saying, hey, we need more accountability, and others are saying, developers have the right to manage their own pre-release publicity.
Right. Some articles even use the word astroturfing, basically, creating fake grassroots support for the game. And they point to some instances where multiple reviews use the same language, almost suspiciously similar, like they're using the same talking points as the developers. It's raising concerns about bias or even outright collusion.
And there's one article actually highlights specific examples of this. It quotes multiple outlets using this exact phrase, triumphant return to form, which just so happens to be, well, the exact same wording the game's creative director, John Epler, said he was hoping to see in reviews.
Wow. That's certainly interesting. But I guess we shouldn't jump to conclusions. We need to look into these allegations a bit more, see if there's anything to them. But before we move on, there's another piece of the puzzle here, the game's player count. Some of the articles you shared, they're expressing concern about the initial player count, especially compared to the Monster Hunter Wilds beta that launched around the same time.
Right. And it's true that Monster Hunter Wilds was just a free beta. So comparing those launch numbers directly, it's not really a fair comparison. But, some industry analysts, they're already saying they're worried about the long-term commercial success of the Veilguard, especially given the, the mixed reception and the high development costs.
Yeah, some articles, they even point to the fact that the player count for the Veilguard, it's been going down steadily since launch, which could be a sign that, the game is struggling to keep players engaged.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on. I mean, initial player numbers, they're not always a sign of how well a game will do in the long run.
Yeah.
But a declining player base, that can be a red flag, especially for a game with, such high expectations.
Wow, this is a lot to think about, and we've only just scratched the surface. When we come back, we're going to dive deeper into some of these controversies and explore what they might mean for the future of the Dragon Age franchise. Stay tuned.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were talking about some of the concerns surrounding Dragon Age, the Veilguard, the changes to character design, gameplay, things like that.
Right, and it seems like all of that, it's feeding into this bigger discussion about, the direction of the whole Dragon Age franchise. Some fans feel like the Veilguard, it's just straying too far from what made those original games so great, while others are saying, look, it's got to evolve to stay relevant.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little more, that straying too far idea. One article you shared, it's from a YouTuber, it goes by Neon Knight. He uses this phrase modern audience to describe the character design. He specifically mentions, only 3 choices from Dragon Age, Inquisition carryover into the Veilguard.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty big reduction in choice carryover. And it does make you wonder, how connected is the Veilguard to the previous games? I mean, Neon Knight, he even calls it a, borderline soft reboot. Maybe that's why some of these longtime fans, they're just not feeling it.
Yeah, feeling a disconnect. It seems like maybe Bioware is trying to attract a new audience with the Veilguard. Maybe at the risk of alienating their existing fan base.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's tough. It's a challenge a lot of game developers face, right? Appealing to new players without, upsetting the old ones.
Definitely. And we're seeing the same tension play out in the whole discussion about queer representation. Some players, they welcome the increased visibility, the inclusivity, but others, they think it's being overemphasized or even used as a marketing tactic.
Yeah, some articles are actually accusing Bioware of queer baiting, basically hinting at LGBTQ plus representation to, attract a certain audience without actually, delivering. And I guess it's coming from the fact that even though the developers have been saying all this stuff about the game's inherent queerness, we haven't actually seen a lot of specifics about how that'll play out in the game itself.
Yeah, and that's fair. Transparency and authenticity, those are key, especially when you're representing marginalized communities. It's important for developers to be upfront about their intentions and not, exploit these communities just for marketing.
Absolutely. Now, let's circle back to those accusations about review score manipulation. Remember that article by Wolfhard FPS, the YouTuber who says he was denied a review code?
Right. He claims it's because he criticized the game during early playtests. And other creators were denied too. That's really concerning, if it's true, of course. It implies that Bioware is trying to, silence dissent, control the narrative, raises all sorts of questions about, the power dynamics between developers and reviewers, and how that affects what gets shared with potential buyers.
And it's not just YouTubers. Mark Kern, remember him? former World of Warcraft team lead.
Yeah.
He's been pretty vocal on social media,
Mhm.
accusing Bioware of astroturfing. Saying some of these reviews, they use suspiciously similar language, like they're just echoing the developers.
Right. He even points out that phrase, triumphant return to form. It pops up in multiple outlets. It is pretty striking, the repetition. Makes you wonder about the objectivity of some of these reviews. Reviewers need to be independent, offer their own honest assessment, not just parrot the developers. Because, people rely on reviews to make informed decisions. Anything that undermines that trust, it's bad for everyone. The industry, the players, everyone.
Exactly. And speaking of damage, remember that whole player count thing we touched on earlier? Monster Hunter Wilds, even in its free beta, just blew the Veilguard out of the water at launch.
Yeah, the difference in numbers is huge, and it's fueling these anxieties about, whether the Veilguard will even be viable in the long term. Kern's been analyzing the player data, and he says session times are low, so people might be trying it, but then they're losing interest quickly.
He even uses this term, the Dragon Age bait and switch. Like, the final game doesn't live up to the hype, or what we saw in previous games. Which brings us back to that, that worry about the game straying too far from its roots and alienating the fans who've been there from the beginning.
It's hard to say what this means for the future of the Veilguard. I mean, player numbers can go up and down, right? Maybe word of mouth will help, or, post-launch updates could turn things around. But the initial reception hasn't been great, and the fact that the player base is declining, it's not a good sign.
Okay, so let's get into something, well, a bit more controversial. This whole idea that the Veilguard is, ultra woke or even like political propaganda.
This is tricky territory because you're dealing with subjective interpretations and people's personal beliefs. What one person sees as harmless representation, someone else might see as, real-world politics intruding into their fantasy game.
Right. One article you shared, it quotes this streamer, Natalia Sirenova, and she says she got a review copy by telling Bioware she was non-binary. And then she goes on to say the game is a piece of garbage, predicts it'll be the tombstone of Bioware.
Wow, that's harsh. Definitely reflects how strongly some people feel about this. But it's important to remember that's just one person's opinion. It doesn't mean everyone feels that way.
Yeah, and Sirenova, she's been critical of Bioware in the past about, their approach to inclusivity. So her take might be colored by that. But she's not the only one bringing this up, this whole idea of forced diversity in the Veilguard.
Yeah, several articles mention a playtester. He broke his NDA to talk about this. Says the Quinari companion, Tash, actually tells the player she's non-binary. And there's this YouTuber, Nur, he posted screenshots, actual game dialogue, confirming Tash uses they-them pronouns.
Wow, and those screenshots also show dialogue options. Like you can talk about gender identity. And there's even a choice to make your character transgender. Some people are saying these things just feel out of place in a fantasy setting, that it breaks the immersion.
That's a valid point. When you're building a fantasy world, you have to think about the culture, the social norms. If something feels forced or out of sync with that world, it can pull players out of the experience.
And then there's this whole thing about the character creator, the inclusion of, top surgery scars.
Yeah.
Some articles are saying this is taking it too far, that it's not about representation anymore. It's about pushing an agenda.
It's understandable why some players might feel that way. It's a tough balance. Representation versus authenticity. And the Veilguard, it's definitely sparking a conversation about where that line is.
Definitely a lot to think about, and there's still more to explore. When we come back, we'll delve into some of the broader implications of all this, what it might mean for the future of gaming. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive. We've been talking about Dragon Age, the Veilguard, and, well, all the controversy around it. The design changes, the gameplay, those elements that some people are calling, ultra woke.
Right, and it seems like all of this, it's sparking a bigger conversation about, representation in games, creative vision, the influence of, social and political movements on the gaming industry. It goes way beyond just this one game. It's about art and entertainment in the 21st century.
Absolutely. And we've touched on player reaction, heard from some folks in the industry. But you also found this article that, well, it tackles this whole thing from a philosophical perspective. It asks this question, is all art political? And it uses the Veilguard's inclusion of top surgery scars as, a main example.
Right. The author, Isaac Young, he argues that, well, for a lot of people on the left, they can only see art through this lens, power dynamics, identity politics. And he says that this, well, it reduces art to just another battleground for ideology. Instead of being a space for, creative expression, exploring what it means to be human.
Yeah, and he even says that people who think this way, they've lost sight of, any higher purpose for art. It's not about beauty or truth or anything like that. It's about pushing a social agenda. And he sees the Veilguard as like the perfect example of this trend, where artistic choices, they seem to be driven more by, well, signaling political allegiance, rather than creating a good gaming experience, something immersive and compelling.
It's a really interesting argument, and I think it reflects this, this cultural divide that we're seeing everywhere, not just in gaming. Whether you agree with Young or not, the Veilguard, it's definitely become a lightning rod for all of these conversations about art, politics, ideology. It's all tied up together.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of different perspectives, you found some articles about David Gator, the former lead writer for Dragon Age. It seems like he has some pretty strong opinions about the backlash against the Veilguard.
Oh yeah, he's been very vocal on social media, criticizing anyone who's upset about the changes, the character design, the whole direction of the game. He even uses some pretty harsh language to describe those critics, saying they're stuck in the past, resistant to progress.
But here's the thing, even Gator himself, he's expressed some reservations about the art style in the Veilguard. He says it leaves him cold, which is interesting, right? It shows how complicated this whole thing is. Even people who are deeply involved in making these games, they're struggling with these changes.
Exactly. And Gator keeps saying that Dragon Age was always woke, but that doesn't seem to match up with the experiences of a lot of longtime fans. They see the Veilguard as a big shift, away from the previous games, especially in how much it focuses on identity politics and social messaging.
It's almost like there's this fight, right? This battle over who gets to define the true spirit of Dragon Age. And that puts Bioware in a tough spot, trying to balance all these competing expectations and still like a good game.
Yeah, and I mean, the reaction to that initial trailer, the character reveal, it was overwhelmingly negative, tons of dislikes. Seems like maybe Bioware misjudged their audience, and then you add in the review manipulation stuff and that disappointing launch day player count. It's not looking good. Seems like they've got a lot of work to do to win back the trust of those fans who feel, alienated by this new direction.
So where does that leave us? We've explored all these different perspectives on Dragon Age, the Veilguard, the excitement, the concerns, the bigger picture stuff about the gaming industry.
And what's clear is that the Veilguard, it's more than just a game. It's a reflection of our times, our anxieties, the things we value. It's like a mirror to society, showing us all of our divisions, the ways we struggle with these complex issues of identity, representation, the role of art in a world that's constantly changing.
Yeah, and it's too soon to say what impact it'll have in the long run.
Yeah.
But the Veilguard, it started a conversation that's going to continue long after the initial, controversy dies down. This deep dive, I think, has given us some real insights into how the gaming industry is changing and the challenges that developers face, trying to create art that's entertaining and, socially relevant.
Right. In the end, whether Dragon Age, the Veilguard succeeds or fails, it depends on the players. Did Bioware deliver? Is it a truly immersive and engaging experience? Or will it be, a missed opportunity? I guess only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, it's a game that's got people talking. And it's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
And maybe, maybe that's its legacy. The conversation has started. So thank you for joining us in this deep dive into Dragon Age, the Veilguard. We hope you found it insightful. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.